Good morning, everyone. So I think Kate said it already, but we're so happy that you're here, and we're so excited to be holding Learning Design Summer Camp. This, for us, is just a fantastic event. This is something that really gets us excited because we love to get everyone in our community together, and even some special people that aren't necessarily learning designers, but technologists, librarians, multimedia specialists, all of you. We just love you, and we're just so happy that you can be a part of this event. And so yesterday, we talked through the two themes, think and plan, and so today we're going to follow up with make. Yesterday when we were talking about a lot of the different concepts that were discussed, we learned about things where we have maybe an educational receipt of what our experience was like going through university. And then we also learned about some different ways to scaffold our learning. And so today, what I thought we would do is sort of kick things off with a discussion or panel discussion focused on what are some of the challenges that we might face in reaching for some of these goals, looking towards the future, because our theme this year is on the horizon. And so what will that classroom of the future look like? And so I have a quick video here just to sort of get you thinking about that. And then after that, we'll hand it over to Delaney, who will start the panel discussion. So while our panel comes up and takes their seats, I'm just going to do a quick interlude. So wouldn't it be really cool if we had technology, devices, software, things like that, that could actually help us sort of figure out what our learning, I don't want to say learning styles, but figure out how we can construct our own learning scaffolds in order to help us improve the way that we learn and how we retain information. But as with any type of technology, software, anything new sort of disruptive technology, there's always challenges and barriers associated with that. And so that's what our panel is going to be focusing on today. So with that, I hand the microphone over to Delaney.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As Megan said, today we are going to be focusing on the technological aspect, the future of technology at, particularly at Penn State. And for me, whenever I participate in these kind of discussions, I always notice two things. One, the future always looks so bright and exciting when you're looking through a telescope, right? It's all these things that are going to be really exciting and happening. And then once you arrive at that year and you're looking through the rearview mirror, it looks kind of disappointing. I'm still waiting for my flying cars that I was promised in 2000. So that's just one of the examples that I think illustrates this. So to get us started, we have a pretty diverse panel here of people from different parts of the campus. And rather than messing up everybody's introduction, I'm just going to let them quickly and briefly introduce themselves. First.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Scott McDonald. I'm faculty in science education in the College of Education, and I'm also the director of the Krause Innovation Studio in the College of Education.
Hi, I'm Nikki Massaro Kaufman. I work as a multimedia specialist with World Campus Learning Design. And so I've worked in instructional multimedia as well as interaction design for learning objects.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Bowen, Director of ETS. I like reading and long walks on the beach.
I can't follow that. I'm Shivani Selvaraj, and I'm a designer at Penn State Harrisburg. And I have to just say that before that, my life was in community organizing, and my approach to instructional design is just constantly infused with that. So.
I probably should have said who I was first. Little oversight. I'm Tura Leniasino, and I'm a dual PhD candidate in learning design and technology and comparative international education. So my goal is to just keep the conversation going. We have a few guiding questions that we have prepared, but hopefully if we get through those, we can engage in the conversation as a whole room. So we had a pretty good setup of that video of what the future could look like. And one of the first questions that I want to start off with is, to pose to the panel, is from your perspective, how do you think we're doing? How do you think we are doing here at Penn State with integrating technology into teaching and learning environments? And I think, Kyle, you being sort of the newest one at Penn State, you probably could maybe give us an interesting perspective based on being new to the community, and let us know how we're doing. They are working.
They have to be turned on.
There we go. So, well, thanks for letting me go first on this one. So the exciting part, and actually to echo a sentiment from a panelist yesterday, was around, our greatest asset is really our people. And I think that is what is so compelling about Penn State is actually the people in this room. The collection of people who are focused on and thinking about these types of issues at the scale that Penn State does it is completely unmatched. I mean, I've never seen it before anywhere. And so certainly from that standpoint, we have the people and talent in place to really take on some of these challenges. In terms of how we're doing, that's a challenging question, mainly because it's kind of like the 100-meter dash in the Olympics, right? Every Olympics, there's a new world record in the 100-meter dash, which begins to bring into question then what is the theoretical limit of what we can do inside of this space. And that's where we're at right now, is that we're kind of pursuing what are those limits. But really, for the first time in years, our technology delivers on so many of the promises that it made early on. Just like you were saying, you were promised a flying car. I was promised a jetpack. Where are these things at now? But the promise of mobility that was first introduced decades ago is happening now. And so that's where we begin to watch videos like the one we just saw, and we look at that and say, that's kind of cool, but at the same time, I could have imagined that. That's not so special. That's a logical progression of that technology. So what are the things that we can't think of, and how do we get to that point?
If I can maybe have the instructional designers sort of follow up on that, because you're the one who are really tasked with making those things happen. So how are we doing? Is what Kyle describing is what you also see on your perspectives?
Well, let's see. I think maybe the way that I'll answer this is folded into also my response to the video as well. And I'm also thinking about what is the realm of what we can't imagine. And I guess my response to the video and what I don't see, or what, or the assumptions that I saw in that video are, one is the assumption that education and the classroom are one. And in my day-to-day life, a lot of what I think about is what is transformative in education outside of the classroom. And one of the things about being a campus designer is that the scale allows me to think about the campus as a whole. I mean, I'm at a scale where I get to touch everybody. You know, I know who's in food services, I know who's in student services, I know the faculty. I work in the faculty center there. And so, because of the perspective that I bring, I'm thinking constantly about how can I agitate and shake things up a little bit to inspire some kind of institutional cultural change, and that's my approach to design. And so that leads me to also say that this is a very celebratory view of technology, and I mean that's an obvious thing, and it's the general tone of what we usually have at these things, and I guess I'm just answering this in a way that just doesn't compartmentalize myself, because my research interests are in digital literacy and poor communities. And I would just say that technology, the existence of the technology doesn't guarantee anything, doesn't determine anything necessary in the future. And I just want to mark that, you know, because we don't often raise that here, you know, and as technology is proceeding in these directions, for sure, you know, another series of videos is A Day Made of Glass. I don't know if you've seen these. Yeah, I mean, they're also very worth checking out. And the imagination of the future is amazing, and it's such a great part of our jobs, to be imagining the future. And at the same time, there are these dark sides of technology that we aren't often talking about here. And I don't want to dwell on that here, but I think that for me, I think the edge of my learning at this point, I think, is in how can we look at this device and how can I deepen my own conceptual and analytical understanding of what's bundled in this device, both technically and philosophically. And if I don't understand that, then I think that there are limits in how I design things. And so I think that that's a place where we can grow as a community. I would say that. I would like to get at some of those philosophical questions, but that's just me.
What they said. Now, there's actually, there's a lot of truth in both what Kyle and Shivani said. First off, I really feel that the technology isn't really about the technology for technology's sake. The greatest thing about this technology is the fact that it brings people together. And I feel like the video did not do that justice. I think where we stand now is that we're using this technology to meet more often. I mean, we're a really large community, and here's the chance to share resources, interact with one another on a daily basis, bring people together across disciplines like we're doing with Learning Design Summer Camp, so that I could be working with somebody who specializes in making this content accessible, and I have access to instructional designers, and we work together as a team, and I think that's where the innovation actually happens, is when we bring people together. I also agree with Shivani about the video. The thing that you see here is, honestly, I think we're already to that point in that video, and I think we can do better. What you saw was still that traditional brick and mortar classroom. It was still largely teacher-centered. And I feel like that promise of technology is that it connects the students with that outside world, connects them to experts, connects them to students elsewhere, panels elsewhere, information. And my kids are already doing that. I watch, when my son wants to learn something new with the guitar in between lessons, he's looking up videos on how to play it on YouTube. And when he was interested in Pompeii because of the Bastille song, he learned how to play it, and then he looked up an hour-long documentary on Pompeii. A lot of my children's learning is happening around that classroom. 2 days ago, I presented with Ryan Klinger. Is Ryan around? And we were talking about universal design for learning, and one of the points of universal design for learning is that you provide all these choices to resources, and today we have that technology to make all of these resources available outside of the classroom or to share as practitioners.
Scott, I wonder if you can sort of pick up on that in terms of the area where that friction of celebrating technology and sort of the extreme of technophobes plays out in the classroom in a lot of spaces. So from a faculty standpoint, how do you think we're doing in integrating these things into our learning environments?
Okay. Well, I guess I'll talk again in terms of the video, in terms of that context. I mean, one of the things that I see in that video that I think has been mentioned certainly most explicitly by Nikki, but is the pedagogy that you saw is not even good pedagogy for what I would consider good pedagogy. Now, Megan did me the favor of picking a science video, so that's my area of expertise, right? So I watched that video and sort of cringe because it's everything that exemplifies what I don't want to see us thinking about when we think about technology in the classroom, because what we've essentially done is taken the most traditional antithetical to the way I think about teaching and layered magic on top of it, and now it's amazing, right? And for me, that's just crazy. I mean, that's not what we should be about as a university, I mean, I think about K-12 and university teaching. That's not what technology's function is. It's not to make boring things magic so they're less boring. I mean, the function of technology is to open up our opportunities for us to make the activities that we're engaged in more engaging, more interesting, more compelling. You know, Nikki's story about her kids learning, I think, is an example of that. So, so in terms of the video, I think it is exactly what a technology person would do if they didn't know much about education, which I'm speculating is the person who made that video, which is, wouldn't it be awesome if we could all have a magic screen that appeared in space, and then we could all type exactly the same notes at the same time while the teacher lectured to us? You know, we've lost the plot, right? I mean, that is not the purpose. So to connect that back to Penn State, I think Penn State is not taking that view. I mean, there are people, I think, who take that view at Penn State, because there are people like that take that view everywhere about technology, that technology is good in and of itself. And so if you add technology, you add quality to a teaching experience. So I don't think that's true, but I think one of the things that Penn State has done remarkably well is think, as Kyle said, at scale, and think about platforms, and think about broadly, how do we figure out what's an infrastructure of support for teaching and learning that will allow people to be creative and support different avenues into new kinds of teaching. So I think Penn State has done that remarkably well. And I think that is, as Kyle said, in large part, a reflection of the people in this room and their perspective on technology and how it interacts with teaching and learning. So do I think we're there yet? Absolutely not. Do I personally think we could spend a lot more time thinking about teaching and learning and a little less time thinking about the technology and how amazing it is? I think probably. But I think that's not only on the folks in this room, that's on folks like me that are faculty at this university who have to think about how can they stop thinking of teaching and learning as, you know, magic screens that pop up so students can take better notes, or asking students to put the lids down on their laptops so they can pay better attention during lecture. I mean, for me, that, again, we've sort of lost track of it. So we've got to have a conversation, I think, first and foremost about how do we want to see teaching and learning happen, which does involve breaking down silos, which does involve getting kids out of the classroom and into the environment and asking real questions about the world instead of seeing the mass of Earth floating in space next to it so that you can remember it.
To follow up on that, so how do we do that? How do we, to keep in, to follow the theme of the make, how do we actually do that? How do we move beyond those of us in the room who have sort of, for lack of a better word, drank the Kool-Aid and already believe that technology has a transformational effect? How do we do that? How do we actually make beyond this room to a larger university?
I think it's Kyle's turn, right?
Sounds good.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for, buddy.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that for people who work with technology, you know, they do so under the belief that technology makes a difference, right? That no matter how dull an ember that may seem at times, that's really the driving force in that decision making. But I think part of the opportunity in there is to think about what does that future look like, right? In a way that borders on science fiction. And in a way that's not like the video we saw that was just kind of a logical extension, but rather looking at, okay, if we look at today's technology, not as the beginning of a revolution, but as the end of one, so what does the next one look like? I'm always inspired by old covers of Popular Science magazine, like from the 50s, right? Because they envisioned a future where, my favorite one is where a guy is snow skiing behind a helicopter, right? And this was in the future, everybody's going to be snow skiing behind helicopters. Right? And that's just craziness. But at the same time, it's this kind of inspiring idea that that's how an activity could be. And so that's when we look at things like what we saw in the video, or even in greatest example is like an iPad, right? We can look at something like that and kind of appreciate the advancement and kind of revel in its simplicity. But then we also have to think, well, we've seen this before. You know, it was first came out in the movie 2001, later depicted in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Shout out to Brad on that. The you know, I use this example all the time. Captain Picard had a device actually called a pad that looked like an iPad, which suggests to me that in the future, you know, we not conquered the problem of male baldness, but tablets. That was a technology that we could crack.
Is that just because I pitched you on this question? Or?
Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
It's just I couldn't pull it off. That all, you know, it's just jealousy. But I think therein lies our opportunity, is to think about this in ways that are completely different, and to marry the pedagogy to the technology in ways that haven't been inspired the same way that an artist in the 50s married snow skiing to a helicopter, right? That we can connect these things in new and novel ways and define what are those theoretical limits. So I think that's part of what we need to look at as we kind of pursue some of these ideas.
Do we have to then maybe change the understanding of the word integration? Because if to integrate, you have to integrate it into what already exists. So especially for the instruction designer's perspective, how do you innovate when integration, really the definition of it, means that you have to incorporate it into what already is there?
Interesting. Well, I guess the way that I think is not to integrate into what is already there, but to create something new, take the opportunity to, and again, I don't know, this may be specific to being a campus designer, but I'm situated in the faculty center at Penn State Harrisburg, and I can't wait for faculty to approach me with their interests, you know, the way that I've approached my job anyway is to identify the faculty who are ready to be bold, who are curious, who want to try things, and then to initiate towards them, and then create some new things. And so I guess my approach to how can we, you know, move forward and integrate the technology is to try to do something big with some few individuals. And so, for instance, a couple of the things that I'm doing is a campus-wide game, which is the newest thing. And we're using mobile devices and integrating the technology, but also implanting crazy orange props in the physical environment so that we're using the technology to get people sensitized to looking at the physical environment and then interacting with each other in new ways, in very non-digital ways. So we might use the technology to put forward, prompt a game challenge that is something like creating origami out of huge orange pieces of paper. You know, and that's where also the make comes in for me. I mean, I think it is important for people to be making things and touching things with their hands, and learning about the connections between origami and engineering, for instance, is part of, is something that's in my game. And we're trying to use technology in ways that kind of gets people thinking about what is this relationship between the online and offline. Another campus program that I'm doing is using the technology as a venue to record stories of lived experience. And so we're using the technology to get it out of the way, but have it be there and provide the venue for something to happen. But it's really a program about listening. And so I'm using the technology to think about how to strengthen the core human values and interaction, but keep it, I don't know, to have it be in the picture in a way that allows us to also question it at the same time. Can we use devices to send smoke signals? You know, is the kind of crazy thinking that we really love to muse about. You know, to think really outside of the box and go back to some very, like what is primitive communication? And ask questions like that. So sorry, I'm really out. This is the kind of out there kinds of thinking that we do in Harrisburg.
So I listened to Kyle talk about 1950s era science fiction, and it reminded me of an article about how interaction design was influenced by science fiction. And it makes me think of how technology has influenced, or how we have influenced technology, but I think the big part is how much then technology has influenced us. So it's not so much about that integration as it is thinking about how has technology changed and shaped how we are today. If you look at, in my world when I'm doing multimedia work, we used to do video-based learning, and they were recorded lectures. They weren't very interactive, and the device that you would play it on wasn't a very interactive device. And now, the gold standard for length in media and how you chunk it is more like what YouTube left as limits in the early days. So we've got that YouTube effect, and we're looking at the device that we're playing it on is an interactive device, and it's set for multitasking. And so we wouldn't want to take what we did with video in the past and apply it to this new device. So we have to look at how people are using things in the world today, how it's influencing them. Our expectations about what we want to get out of a classroom have changed now that we have access to information, and we can learn some things on our own or from each other.
Scott, how do you integrate technology and still be innovative in your teaching practices?
That's an interesting way to put it. So, what do you mean by that? Do you mean I can't be
You're not
innovative
supposed to ask
without
the
integrating?
moderator questions.
Well, you know me. We've had classes together. So, I mean, I guess I always come back to teaching and learning for me. So I like to think that I think first about what I'm trying to accomplish in terms of the teaching and the interactions that I'm trying to create, and then I think about the technologies that will support those kinds of interactions. Now that's a nice imagination, right? I mean, that's the retrospective story I tell myself about the way I think about my work. When in reality, it's probably a whole combination of things, because I'm always interested in trying new technologies and how to figure that out. But for me, going back to this piece about integration, it is a problem. I don't know how else to put it. That if we're thinking about how do we integrate technology, there is implicit in that this idea that we're keeping the thing the same and just integrating. We're stirring the technology into that soup. And I do think that's really problematic. I do think we have to think about what are we trying to accomplish and then figure out how the technology supports that, because we want the thing that drives the choices about technology to be what we want to accomplish, not that the technology is going to drive. And as Nikki said, I mean, those things interact and it's tricky, but I do think that that's really important, that we think about what do we want our teaching and learning to look like? What kind of experiences do we want Penn State students to have when they come here? Right? Do we want them to sit in a large lecture hall? Maybe we do. But my sense is that that kind of notion about how education works is dying, and we just haven't, I don't know how to put this. It may already be dead, and we just haven't recognized it, but we continue to do it. So the question is, what do we really want our students to experience when they arrive here? Do we want them all to have a uniform experience? Do we want them all to sort of do the same thing and sort of march through the curriculum? And if so, then all we need to do is integrate technology into what we're currently doing, and we're okay. If not, then I think we have a bigger rethinking job to do.
To follow up on that, and also to bring in Shivani's idea of sort of thinking really outside the box and acting. And so I wonder if you can all reveal what is if you had your way of making one thing that will revolutionize your practice and impact education, what would that thing look like? So that's part one, and part two would be what is preventing you from doing that? An example that I want to give is that I was doing a research project in Southern Africa with iPads in a community that has no electricity or anything else like that. And one of the things that we were talking about with students was, how do you power the iPad? Because one student said, if you gave me the iPad, I'm going to throw it away because I have no electricity, no internet, how am I going to do it? And one kid stood up and said, well, if you gave it to me, I'll cut a little hole in the corner and put gasoline in it, so that I can start the thing and allow it to work. So I try not to laugh at him because electricity and water doesn't really mix, but the more I thought about it, I was like, well, that's actually a brilliant idea, because for him, machines run with gasoline. This is a machine, and that's how he's going to make it work in his community. So in your community and in your experience, what would be the innovative thing that you would like to do but you can't really do right now?
I think we should let Scott start that one.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess I can't honestly answer what would be the thing. I mean, my current obsession is about space. So I'll start with space and classroom space. My sense is that as devices get smaller and smaller, the space that we're having our students engage in learning in, yeah, you get what I'm talking about. The place where the kids go to learn, those spaces are going to become increasingly important, how we organize them. Because I think one thing that I would take away from the video is this idea that you could come into a space and the space will interact with you sort of automatically, right? Because you have your device in your pocket, because there are displays in the space. You can do things, and I know, again, this is stuff that's already happening. So I would love to see us starting to think about how do we redesign space, and that's something I think the answer to the second question, why haven't we done it, is usually money or time, or some combination of those two things. But I would love to see us thinking about how does the technologies that we have and that our students are coming with, how does that interact with the space that we're putting them in, and how can that affect the way that we think about teaching and learning in these environments?
I feel like this is a beauty pageant question. Can we practice our waves? Aside from ending world hunger, there are probably two things that I really wish we had. I mean, I tell everybody that I interact with when they ask what I do, I work in a job that didn't even exist when I went to school. Not when I was in high school, not when I was in college. And I think this is amazing. So how do we prepare students for this changing world? And what I feel like is that in the classroom, we're rewarding the behaviors that shouldn't even be rewarded. And we're penalizing those behaviors that we want students to have, that outside of the box thinking, that being able to just reach out and find their own learning on their own terms. It reminds me of the Ken Robinson TED Talk about strip mining for certain skills or certain behaviors, when we have this wealth of student experiences and student abilities that we should be cultivating. So that would be my first magical wish. My second magical wish, it has to do with internet access here, because it's very important and we're so far behind where we could be because we're limited to a number of providers. And I feel like everybody should care about our infrastructure, because we don't just have a concern when we're talking about other countries, but in our own country, when we're talking about rural areas, or I live an hour away in Altoona, which is still technically a city, and yet my choices are really bad DSL on aging copper or overpriced cable that still doesn't get me the speeds that we need for the classroom of the future. So we should all care about that.
Has anybody ever seen the movie Weekend at Bernie's? You ever seen this movie? So there's this idea called the Weekend at Bernie's principle that suggests that every movie is somebody's favorite movie. And we know this is true because Weekend at Bernie's had a sequel. So somebody must have liked it if they made a sequel out of it. So really what that describes is kind of this long tail effect, right? That for everything that there's somebody that's its favorite thing. And so I think in this particular space, I think the issue is that we should actively resist. We should run away from the idea that there's one thing that we could do to change everything, right? Because that was really the promise of like learning management systems, right, when they came around. Was that, oh, and this is a completely IT response to teaching and learning. It was like, oh, yeah, we solved ed tech. We have an LMS. We're good now, right? Isn't that how that works? I solved it. I've solved learning, right? And so the idea that there would be a thing that could be implemented, that's something we should run away from and embrace the idea that due to differences in domain, differences in learners, differences in how our learners come to learning, especially here at Penn State, that there are so many things that this is a battle that gets fought on many fronts. And so that's where we have to kind of think creatively about what are those solutions, what are those enabling technologies. So if I could ask for one thing, I would say I'd like 15 minutes with everyone who teaches so that I can learn how they teach and understand what their challenges are. Because that's as close as I think we could get to a one thing that could kind of move us forward on all of those fronts.
Yeah. I think what I want is a collaboratory. I think it's similar to the idea of space, and this is actually an idea that we've been talking to our administrators about a little bit, and who knows where it'll go, but we are trying to see if we can get some space with some technology fitted with some fabrication kinds of tools, and I would like to really get to continue this kind of path that we're forging with partnering with faculty to create some new things that are outside the box, that are inspiring to others. I mean, I've been doing not a very good job of explaining the different programs that are going on there, but one of the outputs of Worldwide Narratives, for instance, is 250 stories of the campus members. And the benefit of doing this with a faculty member outside of a siloed classroom is that there are now these 250 stories. They act as data. They can also be curated in all kinds of different ways for different kinds of content. I've been meeting with faculty in different schools to think about doing some kind of collective course pack where they look at the stories through their individual disciplinary lenses so that we can create different kinds of instructional strategies. You know, I think that there are lots of different, there's all just different kinds of things that we can innovate depending on who we're working with, exactly. And I mean, I'm hoping that we can use technology to preserve traditions and languages that we don't see in the video. And there are probably faculty who are concerned with that kind of thing. I mean, I think that there's all sorts of things that we need to just pioneer.
I'm going to deviate a little bit from our program and maybe see if people in the audience have a question or a point that they want to bring up that they want us to discuss for the remaining minutes. Yes.
This may be a tricky question to ask. You brought up an interesting point about your experience in Africa. And I guess this question is for everybody, but Scott, I'm thinking of you specifically. So what I heard when you brought that up was you took something to an entirely different context than what you used here, and that inspired creative thinking. So, I mean, could we do that? Could you lock up Willard for a day and say, like, figure it out? You know, like, do we need something that drastic in order to really inspire new thinking and get people to create different ideas about it? Or is it possible to bring some of these traditional old school thinkers along in ways that are easier to digest?
Go ahead.
Oh. I think so. For me personally, I think that for me, the synergy that is going to move us into innovative ways of teaching and learning is when you bring people who maybe have little knowledge of something versus people who have a lot of knowledge of something, and seeing how that interaction happened. I think the explosion that happens when those points merge, I think that's really, for me, that's awesome. And it doesn't mean about bringing somebody from, let's say, Aborigines in Australia to, State College or anything like that. It could just be from the College of Ed versus the College of Agriculture, and seeing how that synergy happens. So I personally believe in that idea of bringing different groups together and seeing what kind of creative thinking that we can come from that.
I guess before I answer, I'd like to know who you're going to lock in Willard. You're locking them out of Willard. So they have to do all their learning outside of the building is what you're saying. Yeah, okay. I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, I guess what I would say is I wouldn't want to be obsessed with the ideas that the classroom is what's causing the problem, right? That sending people out into the world necessitates them doing more innovative and interesting kinds of teaching. I mean, I think for me, the question is, what are you trying to accomplish? So I see, if you drive your curriculum or think about teaching and learning around questions, trying to answer questions and helping your students answer questions that they have about the world, that's a very different notion. And that necessitates getting out of Willard. Now, whether you lock them out or just ask them nicely to leave and go do stuff, or whether they just do that on their own, I don't know. But I do think, that there's this idea, I think, often in technology in particular, that there's a dichotomy, like there's the bricks and mortar classroom, and then there's the sort of not bricks and mortar, there's the magic land of the internet, and that that in some those things are somehow oppositional to each other, or one's bad and one's good, or one's real and one's not, and so I think all that doesn't really do our students much of a service. I mean, I think, again, that's why for me the questions are always about what are you trying to do, rather than what are you trying to do it with.
So there's been a lot of talk about newer generations of students, familiarity with technology and things, and that there's controversy there. But what do you see the role of students in terms of shaping the learning environment in the future? In terms of at the table talking about it, not just they have these technology skills and things, but how do you see that and tapping into the students' expertise in the learning environment?
Are you directed to any specific person or just? All right. Nikki, you want to take that?
I suppose I could take that. So from my own experience as a parent of two very, very different children, I think that what you said about, well, the jury's still out on the what skills students bring, I would agree that I have two different people in my house. And one of them is very good at following to the letter what somebody says, and when they want to know this piece of information, they say, well, how do I find it? Well, what do I put in the search engine? How do I get to that information? The other one is more like what I call the cartoon genie, and that's the one who's willing to try things. And so the first one, you have to specifically tell her what she can do, and the second one, you have to tell him what he cannot do, because he's going to immediately jump to outside the box. I'm going to go do this myself. I'm going to go try to fix something or rewire something or cook breakfast because I looked up a recipe on the internet and I've got everything ready to go, and now I need somebody to help me turn on the oven. So I think that it varies based on who the student is, because we're making assumptions about this digital native, but these children and how they use technology are as different as we are.
I was just going to say that, earlier Nikki made this fantastic point about how technology has changed us and has changed our students. And, it always reminds me of how every one of us probably has a friend that if we called them right now, they would never answer, but if we texted them, they'd text us right back. And it's not you, well, if you don't have a friend like that, maybe it's you I'm talking about. Yeah.
I learned it from watching you, Dad.
But that changes our kind of interaction, I mean, every one of us has probably used our cell phone as a way to avoid a conversation before, whether it be to pretend to have a conversation or check your email in an elevator or whatever the case may be. So it changes these kinds of interactions, but it's also had a much different influence in terms of creation right? The idea that you can create in both digital and in physical forms, and which fits so well inside of this track. And so our students are now bringing this way of thinking, these skills to bear, and this is kind of this new space around that we can engage, which is around engaged scholarship, which is around entrepreneurship, which is around activism, which is around community engagement. These activities that students are doing, and we didn't even have to ask, right? They're already engaged in that. So the question becomes, how do we support them? So if a student wants to develop a product and start a business, how do we help them do that? How can we inspire them to want to do that? And these are the places, and what are the technologies, and that's where I have to look at this, is what are the technologies that can enable that for them, so as they want to pursue those endeavors. So I think that's kind of part of the role, is that they are so much the guide now in terms of the kinds of learning that they can kind of extract from the institution.
I think we're about out of time. To just sum up, I think what I learned from everybody is that the video was not cool. It's it's not what the future of education is gonna look like.
Education with jazz hands.
Exactly. So, but again, thank you very much for your thoughts.